They thought he was just another wanderer, tall, dusty, with a calm face that didn't match his tattered clothes. When he entered the village of Umudim, no one bowed. No one knew. Under the weight of the sun, he walked past the traders and the elders, looking like a man with nowhere to sleep. But beneath the worn tunic and faded sandals was Prince Juwon, the only son of King Olumide, sent by his father to live amongst commoners and learn humility before wearing the crown. The prince had begged for this journey. He wanted to know the heart of his people. He wanted to feel their pain, share their meals, and listen to their silence. So without guards, riches, or horses, he came as nobody. And Umudim welcomed him the way he did all nobodies, with suspicion and silence. But Juwon didn't mind. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for truth. And as he passed the dusty courtyard and saw the young village maid sweeping with quiet grace, something shifted. Her eyes did not follow him. She looked at the ground, but her presence felt like thunder. He did not know her name, but already she had his attention. Didi was not like the other girls. She never joined the gossiping at the stream or chased after traders for jewelry. She was silent, always working, cleaning the square, helping old women fetch firewood, feeding goats that weren't hers. Some said she was mute, others whispered she was cursed, but the truth was simpler. Didi was hiding from a past that had left scars under her wrapper and secrets behind her silence. Nobody knew where she came from. She had arrived one Harmattan morning with nothing but a woven mat and a locket she never opened. The chief's wife had taken pity and allowed her to stay in the servant's hut. From there, she worked, lived, and slept. Every morning, she was the first to rise and the last to rest. Her hands knew every corner of the village, but no one knew her heart, not even the boys who admired her from afar. Didi kept to herself, trusting no one, speaking only when she had to. But on the day that dusty stranger arrived, something inside her stirred. She didn't look at him, but her spirit trembled, as if a shadow she had buried deep had just come back home. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the village glowed in soft orange light. The palm tree in the center of Umudim cast a long shadow across the ground where Didi was sweeping. The stranger stood nearby, pretending to admire the fading sky, but his eyes kept returning to her. He didn't speak. He only watched, and she pretended not to notice. But in the silence, something passed between them, an ancient recognition, like two souls who had met long before. When a small child ran past and tripped near the broom, Juwon reached to help. Their hands almost touched. And in that moment, Didi looked up. Their eyes met, just once, but it was enough. He saw not just a maid, but a woman carrying a weight he couldn't name. And she saw not just a stranger, but a man who didn't belong in the dust. Something inside her whispered, "Beware." But the whisper was soft. That night, as Juwon sat under the stars, he thought of her, not the village, not the mission, just her. And in the servant's hut, Didi held her locket close and prayed the past wouldn't recognize her face, because once before, it almost destroyed her. In Omudim, nothing stayed secret for long. By morning, the traders had already noticed how the stranger's eyes followed Didi. They whispered near their calabashes, laughed behind folded arms, and watched closely from behind stall shades. Who was this man who showed so much interest in the silent maid? But Juwon heard nothing. His ears were deaf to everything but the call inside his heart. He had seen many women in the palace, daughters of chiefs, women dressed in gold and perfume. But none of them looked like Didi. None of them moved with such quiet strength. That day, he offered to help fetch water from the stream, and the women laughed. A man helping a maid? Strange indeed. But Didi only nodded, not saying a word, and they walked together, alone with only the wind between them. Her silence wrapped around him like a spell. She did not smile, did not ask who he was, but in her silence, Juwon felt more peace than all the palace noise had ever given him. He was falling, fast, and he didn't even know her name was not the one she was born with, nor that her silence was hiding more than pain. It was hiding royalty. Mama Ndidi, wife of Chief Okonkwo, had lived long enough to know when something wasn't ordinary. She watched the stranger with narrowed eyes. She watched Didi too. She had once taken pity on the girl because she saw sadness in her, the kind that doesn't cry but never leaves. But now she was seeing something else: interest, connection, trouble. That evening, while Didi swept the compound and Juwon walked nearby again, Mama and Didi called the prince to her veranda. She didn't ask where he came from. She asked why his eyes followed her maid. Juwon smiled politely and said he admired hard-working people. But Mama and Didi had raised 6 sons. She knew that kind of admiration too well. Men like you don't come here to admire brooms, she said softly. Juwon didn't answer. He didn't need to. As he walked away, Mama and Didi looked at Didi, still sweeping, still silent, still guarded. Something deep inside her stirred. She'd seen that face before, years ago, in a photograph hidden in a drawer. But it couldn't be. Could it? That night, she opened the drawer again, and what she found made her blood go cold. The girl in the photo wore the same locket Didi now clutched. Years ago, before Didi was Didi, she was known as Adesua, the first daughter of a nobleman from Ekitiland who had vanished after a family betrayal. Her mother had died suddenly, and her uncle had claimed the estate, casting Adesua out as an unwanted child. She had run, changed her name, burned her past, and become invisible. The locket she wore was all she had left of her mother, a tiny golden oval with a picture of them together, sealed shut for years. That night, after Mama Ndidi stared at her strangely, Didi couldn't sleep. She took out the locket and a crumpled letter, one she had written but never sent. It was addressed to her uncle, cursing him for what he did. But she had never mailed it. Anger had cooled and fear had replaced it. She stared at the letter again, tempted to burn it like before. But something told her not to. Something told her the past wasn't finished with her yet. Outside her hut, Juwon stood under the moonlight, watching the flame of her lantern flicker. He had no idea that the girl who swept the square had once been a princess herself, and her secret was waking up again. The village square buzzed with excitement. After many months of waiting, the chief announced the return of the Great Drum Festival, a celebration of ancestors, music, and mass dances. It was the one day when strangers were allowed to dance in the sacred circle and where names could be revealed or hidden. For Juwon, it was a chance to learn more about the people. For Didi, it was a nightmare in disguise. She knew the festival. She had attended it once in her old life, wearing beads of coral and a royal wrapper. Back then, her name was announced with pride. But now, any public display, any familiar face could pull the mask off her new identity. Still, she could not refuse. All hands were expected to prepare the square. Juwon volunteered to help hang lanterns. Didi was tasked with sweeping the sacred floor. Their paths crossed again and again. Their smiles became slower, their glances longer. But the festival was approaching fast, and so was danger. Because festivals bring people from far and wide, and someone from her past was already on the way. A man who knew the truth, a man who wanted her gone. He arrived before dawn, riding a mule with slow arrogance, eyes searching the village like a predator looking for prey. His name was Adebayo, a cousin of Didi's late father. Years ago, he had joined her uncle in stripping Adesua of her inheritance. Now he was an advisor to a regional chief and had traveled to Umudim for the festival, or so he claimed, but his reasons were darker. Word had reached him through whispers and travelers that a girl resembling Adesua now worked as a maid in Umudim, a girl with a gold locket, a girl who had not died as he hoped. When he saw Didi sweeping near the shrine, his jaw tightened. She had changed, thinner, quieter, but those eyes, they were her mother's eyes. He watched her from afar, then walked away without a word. He needed proof. He needed time. And if she was who he thought she was, he would finish what he and her uncle had started. That night, as the village danced to early drums, Adebayo met with a messenger under the trees. He whispered one word, "Watch," and the messenger began his work. Juwon had never been good at ignoring instincts, and something about Didi felt off, not in a troubling way, but like a puzzle missing a few corners. She didn't talk about her past. She avoided the festival preparations that involved singing or stories. And when she saw the man in the leopard cloth, her broom slipped from her hand. He caught the moment, even though she pretended to recover quickly. That night, Yuwon sat outside the servant huts, staring at the stars, thinking about her. He didn't care that she was a maid. In truth, he envied her strength. But now, he started to ask himself a question he had avoided until now. Who is she really? He didn't know about the letter. He didn't know about the stolen inheritance. But his heart was waking up to a truth his mind hadn't accepted. He was falling in love deeply, and he had no idea he was standing at the edge of a storm. In her hut, Didi tried to sleep, but she couldn't, because the man who had once stolen her name had returned, and this time he wouldn't leave without a fight. The village square blazed with light and rhythm. Drums pounded like thunder, dancers in mass spun like spirits, and fires crackled under the moon's silver gaze. It was the night of the great drum festival, when truth could be hidden behind beauty and lies danced beside laughter. Didi stood by the edge of the sacred circle, clutching her broom tighter than ever before. Her eyes darted through the crowd, always landing on Adebayo. He had not approached her, not yet, but his presence hung over her like smoke. Juwon stood across the square, wearing a plain tunic and wooden beads, blending in with the villagers. But his eyes never left Didi. Tonight, something about her seemed even more distant, like a candle trying not to burn. The chief made his entrance, leading chants and calling blessings from the gods. But Didi felt none of it. All she felt was the weight of her locket against her skin and the dread that tonight someone would call her real name. Because if the past found her here, everything she had rebuilt would fall apart. And this time, there might be no one to catch her. Adebayo had come prepared. Dressed in royal cloth and eagle feathers, he watched Didi from behind a ceremonial mask, but his plan was not to confront her publicly. He wanted to watch her fall. He whispered to the announcer, a young boy who didn't know any better, and passed him a name, Adesua. "Call her to dance," he said. "Call Adesua." The boy, thinking it was part of the festival act, stepped into the center of the crowd and called out, "Let Adesua, daughter of nobility, join the dance of grace." E. The drums stopped. Silence swept the square. Didi froze, her soul flung into the air. No one moved. Even Juwon looked confused. Only Adebayo smiled beneath his mask. But before Didi could run, Mama Ndidi stepped forward and raised her hand. "There is no Adesua here," she said calmly, her voice slicing the tension. "Only Didi, who serves this land with honor." Her eyes locked on Adebayo's mask. The festival honors truth, not tricks. The drums resumed, but the air stayed tight. Didi slipped away from the crowd, heart racing, breath stolen. And Juwon followed, because in that moment, he knew. The maid he loved was not who she pretended to be. Juwon found her by the river, sitting alone under the moonlight, locket open, eyes full of shame. She didn't speak. She just held out the locket, letting him see the photo inside. Her as a child beside a beautiful woman, both wearing royal beads. "My name," she finally said, "is Adesua." The truth uncoiled like a python between them. She told him everything, how her uncle had betrayed her, how she ran, how she became Didi to survive. Juwon sat silently, letting the wind carry her words to his heart. He didn't feel anger. He felt something deeper. Sorrow for her pain, admiration for her strength, and confusion about his own silence. He wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't just in love. He was a prince too, sent to understand the people, to live their truth. And now, sitting beside a hidden princess, he understood more than ever. "I didn't mean to fall for you," she whispered. "I just did." Juwon looked at her, not as a maid or a runaway noble, but as a woman who had survived what most could not. The river flowed gently beside them, but in their hearts a new tide was rising, one that would change everything. At dawn, Juwon and Adesua stood beneath the old baobab tree, its branches stretching like the arms of forgotten ancestors. There, he made a quiet promise, not with words, but with presence. He wouldn't walk away, not from her, not from her story. Adesua looked at him with tired eyes, eyes used to abandonment, not loyalty. "You know now," she said softly. "You can leave if you want." But Juwon shook his head. He had lived in a palace, but he had never known someone so brave. She had been stripped of everything, name, home, dignity, and still rose every morning to sweep the village like a queen without a throne. If there was anyone worthy of royalty, it was her. "I'm not staying because I pity you," he said quietly. "I'm staying because I see you." Under that sacred tree, the two broken hearts found something whole. But peace, as always, is borrowed. And behind the trees, someone watched. Adebayo wasn't finished. He had tasted shame during the festival, and now he wanted revenge. The storm hadn't passed. It was just gathering weight in the clouds. Adebayo didn't return to his lodge. He went straight to the shrine of the old priest, a man who owed him favors from years past. There, he whispered lies. That Adesua was a thief, that she used charms to seduce men, that she was a cursed child who had once brought death to her own mother. The priest, half blind and clinging to old superstitions, listened carefully. He had seen Adesua only from afar. She had never offered sacrifices, never knelt before him. That alone made her suspicious. Adebayo gave him a pouch of cowries and promised more. "Expose her," he said. "She's dangerous." The next morning, whispers swept through Umudim like harmattan dust that the maid had demons, that the prince in rags had fallen under her spell, that something dark hid behind her silence. Juwon heard the whispers. So did Adesua, but neither spoke. Instead, they held on to that moment under the baobab. hoping it would hold them up. But Adebayo's poison was spreading fast, and soon the village that once ignored the maid began to fear her. And fear in Umudim was more dangerous than hate. On the third day after the festival, the village bell rang 3 times at noon, a sound reserved for only one thing: public judgment. Juwon and Adesua were summoned before the elders, not because of love but because of fear. The priest stood before them, claiming visions, dreams, omens, that Adesua was not who she said she was, that her presence had brought drought, sickness, and confusion to the land. The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others looked away. Mama Ndidi tried to speak, to defend the girl she had once protected, but her voice was drowned out. The chief, heavy with tradition, turned to Adesua. Is it true? He asked. Are you a bringer of misfortune? Adesua did not cry. She stood tall, even as her knees trembled. She held a locket to her chest and said only one thing: the truth does not need shouting. But in Umudim, truth alone was not enough, and Juwon, still in disguise, was forced to make a choice: reveal who he really was, or watch her fall alone. And the time for hiding had finally ended. The square was silent, yet heavy. Adesua stood at the center, surrounded by whispers, suspicion, and fear disguised as tradition. The elders waited. The priest's accusations hung in the air like smoke. Even the wind refused to move. Juwon stepped forward. His disguise was still on. Plain tunic, dusty feet, humble expression. But inside him, fire burned. He had lived as a villager, felt the heat of their days, the weight of their silence, and the burden of their poverty. But today, he would no longer watch in silence. He stood beside Adesua, placed a hand on her shoulder, and turned to face the crowd. If she is to be judged, he said, then judge me too. Murmurs rose like storm clouds. Who was this stranger? What gave him the right? Then Juwon removed a simple ring from his pocket. The royal crest of Arlu Kingdom gleamed in the sun. Gasps erupted. The chief's wife covered her mouth. The elders stood. I am Juwon, son of King Olumide, and if she is guilty of deception, then so am I. The square exploded with confusion, but the fire had been lit. The truth, once hidden, had stepped into the light, and it would not retreat. The elders reconvened behind closed walls. The villagers gathered in anxious circles, whispering tales of royalty, hidden identity, and forbidden love. Some felt betrayed, others felt ashamed. A maid, a prince, lies wrapped in silence. But Mama Didi stood tall in front of the crowd. She reminded them how Adesua had swept their square, nursed their sick, fed their goats. She reminded them how kindness often wears no crown. Meanwhile, inside the council hut, Juwon spoke plainly. He told the truth, not just about Adesua, but about himself. How he had come to learn humility, how she had shown him more about royalty than any throne. The chief listened, torn between tradition and justice. The priest muttered about curses and signs, but no one echoed him. The youngest elder, a man named Eze, stood and said, if royalty can kneel in love, then who are we to stand in judgment? Silence followed. Not everyone agreed, but not everyone opposed. The tide was shifting. Outside, Adesua waited beneath the same baobab where Juwon had first made his vow. She didn't know what the elders would decide, but she knew one thing. This time, she would not run. If they cast her out, they would do so facing her truth. When the elders returned, the sun was setting, casting golden fire across the village. The chief stepped forward and raised his hand. Adesua, daughter of Ekiti land, he said, You came to us in silence, but in your silence, you served. You healed. You never demanded, only gave. We judged you wrongly. He turned to the people. She is not cursed, she is courageous. Then, looking at Juwon, he bowed slightly, a rare gesture. Your Highness, may your heart guide your future as it guided you here. The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others cried. A few walked away, still bound by old thinking, but most remained. That night, lanterns filled the square, not for a festival, but for forgiveness. Juwon and Adesua stood hand in hand, no longer prince and maid, but two hearts that had found each other through storms. As fireflies danced around them, Juwon whispered, "You are more royal than I ever was." And Adesua, for the first time in years, smiled without fear. The village had not only seen her, they had accepted her. The past had not been erased, but it had been overcome. And in that moment, love lit the night brighter than any flame. Far away, in the golden halls of Erelu Kingdom, King Olumide sat with a letter in hand. It had come not through a messenger, but through the hands of a child who had traveled with a caravan. The king read slowly, carefully. It was from his son, Prince Juwon. But the letter did not speak of gold, conquest, or power. It spoke of a woman, a village, a fire that purifies instead of destroys. It told of a girl named Adesua, who had once lived as a royal, fallen as a shadow, and risen again, not through might, but through quiet strength. The king's eyes moistened. His son had not only learned humility, he had found wisdom. And in that girl, he saw the story of their people, the pain, the resilience, the courage. That day he summoned the royal guards and sent a message back. Prepare a place, not for a maid, but for a queen in waiting. Because some crowns are not made of gold, they are made of fire survived and battles walked through. And such crowns belong only to those who never stopped rising. But not all hearts soften with truth. Adebayo, disgraced and bitter, watched from afar as the village welcomed Adesua with open arms. His plan had failed. The priest who once listened now ignored him. The elders no longer feared his words, but bitterness is a seed that grows in dark corners. One night, he entered a hut while the village slept. He didn't come to kill. He came to steal the one thing she had left, the locket, that small oval piece that held her mother's smile. But Juwon, always alert now, had sensed something was wrong. When he saw the figure in the shadows, he raised the alarm. Adebayo was caught, not by guards, but by the same villagers who once ignored her. They bound him, not with ropes, but with shame. He was banished at sunrise. No drums, no ceremony, just a trail of silence as he walked into exile. And as the sun rose behind him, it lit only one thing, Adesua, standing in the square, her locket safe in hand, and her people surrounding her like the walls of a new home. Days passed. The village did not return to how it was. It became something new. The square was cleaned with more pride. Children no longer ran from Adesua, they ran to her. Women asked her for advice. Others greeted her with respect. She didn't sit on any throne, but they called her the heart of Umudim. She still swept sometimes, not because she had to, but because it reminded her of how far she'd come. Juwon remained by her side, not as a prince, but as a man who had found truth in humility. The message from his father came quietly. It invited both of them to return to Erelu, to present their bond before the court, to speak the truth aloud in a kingdom where lies had once ruled. Adesua didn't answer immediately. She looked around the village at the smiles, the dust, the people who had become her kin. She had no palace, no diamonds, but here she had healing, and healing was more powerful than a crown. We will go, she finally said, but we will return. Because the girl who was once hidden no longer feared being seen, and the maid who swept floors now walked like a queen. When Adesua stepped into the royal court of Eralu, she didn't wear silk or gold. She wore the same wrapper she had worn when sweeping Umudim's square. Her feet were bare, her back was straight. The courtiers whispered, but the king rose from his throne. He didn't speak of protocol. He stepped forward and embraced her. You carry more than your name, he said. You carry a story. Juwon stood beside her, not as a guide, but as a witness. Together, they knelt, then rose together. The king declared their union blessed, not by titles or dowries, but by trials overcome. That day, Adesua was not crowned in the traditional way. No heavy jewel touched her brow. Instead, the king placed her mother's locket, restored and polished, around her neck. It was not just a symbol of her bloodline, it was a symbol of survival. The maids wept, the chiefs bowed, and in a hall filled with royalty, the girl who once swept dust now walked like the ancestor of kings. Because some stories do not end in palaces, they begin there, lose everything, and rise from ashes. Months passed. The court of Erlu tried to keep them. They built her a chamber, gave her titles, offered her power. But Adesua's heart beat in Umudim. She missed the children who ran barefoot. She missed Mama Ndidi's yam stew. She missed the evenings under the baobab tree, where stars felt close enough to touch. So she returned, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Juwon returned too, not with guards, but with tools, books, and seeds. They built a school under the mango trees where Adesua taught not just numbers and letters, but courage, grace, and truth. The villagers no longer called her maid or princess. They called her Ifeoluwa, the one who brings light. And Juwon, they called him Olusegun, the one who brings peace. They lived in a small house near the river. No throne, no palace, just laughter, stories, and purpose. In the end, they didn't need crowns because the people crowned them every day with love. Years later, when Adesua had become a mother and her hair turned silver like the riverbanks she once sat beside, children would gather at her feet, asking the same question: Mama, is it true you were once a maid? She would smile, eyes twinkling, and say, No, my child, I was never just a maid. I was a story waiting to be told. And they would laugh, unaware of the battles she had fought, the tears she had swallowed, the thrones she had refused. But in every smile, in every broom that swept the village square, in every girl who walked tall, though poor, Adesua's spirit lived on. They built no statue. They needed none. Her life was etched into the soil, into the hearts of those who had watched her rise. And the boy who fell in love with the village maid, he never stopped loving her, not even after death, because love built on truth never fades. And a woman who finds herself again becomes more than royalty. She becomes legend.